everyone, and welcome back to another Stogie Lads podcast. How are you doing, lad?
Great lad. Today was the first semblance of spring, actually. I had a cigar outside on the balcony in only the Stogie Lads hoodie, no jacket or anything needed, and it was
Nice.
hot, no wind, and the sun. Now we're like in March where the sun actually warms you up. So if there's no wind, the sun is enough for it to feel like summer. So yeah, spirits are obviously high when you can get a cigar in good conditions. How about you, laddie?
No, it's been good. We've had spring down here for a while. It feels like. I mean, I know Stockholm has been cold. Lund has been pretty good. Been blessed with the weather for like a week, and in that time, I did actually have a cigar as well.
Right.
Last week. So yeah, that was nice to get out into the sun, just take a walk in the park, sit down in the sun, and have a smoke. It was
What
nice.
did you have, lad?
I
El Rey del
had
Mundo, right?
yes, yeah. I I just blanked. It was a morning cigar, and it was El Rey del Mundo.
Nice.
I'd brought it to the Herf that we were at in Stockholm, and didn't smoke it there.
Nice. Right.
So it was pretty much next on my list.
Good
I
lad.
decided for that one.
Nice. Yeah, we'll get to the cigar I smoked later because that has something to do with the podcast topic today. But yeah, it's good. It's this weird period now where like the lake is still frozen and there's still snow around, but it was like it's a weird feeling when there's snow and ice everywhere, but you're like sitting in like light
And it's spring.
light hoodie, in spring. Yeah, we're finally doing a back-to-back podcast here with just us, lad. It feels like a year ago when we're doing this schedule-wise.
The beginning of exactly.
I don't know if there's more updates because I mean, what's happened? I speaking of herfs, I did a herf at the Stockholm Cigar Lounge. I didn't tell you about that.
Oh right.
The one.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's in a southern suburb called El Cayer, and they have like a big house, part of a big office building kind of place, and it's a private club, and it's super cool. You can come as a guest, and like a classic lounge feel. There's like black leather furniture everywhere. It's like a real big lounge.
Nice.
Free to take. You can buy beers and stuff at the place, and it's just it was really nice. I had 3 cigars though. I did want to say in this podcast that was the first time in like my 5 years of smoking cigars that I actually got a little cigar sickness.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I was sitting next to Manny, my friend, or our friend, and another guy that invited us there, another Dominican guy. And the air freshener machines that you have in like lounges, that was behind me to the right of me, and Manny was to the left of me. So all his smoke was sort of getting slowly sucked, and it went by me. And I was getting all my own smoke and his, and I think there was just too much smoke in the air around me. Because after that, on the way home in the car, I was like feeling really nauseous, and I was like, "Damn, am I car sick?" But then because I never get car sick, and then when I went home and laid down, like I felt really woozy and like pretty sick. So.
All right. Yeah. No, because I remember experiencing that after the first herf we had at Charles, because the day after, because then we smoked 3 cigars, but that was outside, so it wasn't the constant layer of smoke, but I think it was just like 3 pretty heavy smokes. I don't remember exactly what we had, but yeah, I remember feeling the next day at least, or maybe it was because we were outside as well, that it was part of that.
Because we had a Gurkha lot. The Gurkha outside poisoned you.
Yeah. Oh yeah, true.
No, but I guess
That
it's
must
very
have been
circumstantial. But it was unpleasant, and I think we have pretty good nicotine tolerance, which is good because I would hate for that feeling to come more off. I mean, that's literally the first time. So, but I can't imagine like
pretty unpleasant.
Yeah, it would suck. We have a pretty heavy topic today in terms of length, I think. So we shouldn't be chit-chatting too much, lad. I guess let's just do the what's in your glass. I want to hear, as per usual, what is in your glass today, lad?
Well, I did recently on my last trip to Systembolaget, the place where you buy alcohol, buy a bottle of Campari. So I'm making the grand return of the Negroni on this show now.
Good lad.
It was a while ago, but I haven't had a Campari like bottle in my in my shelf for a long time. I've just had the martini and the gin, so I felt like you needed to pick that up.
Nice. Good.
Good so stuff. Yeah, just a nice Negroni here in my glass.
Looks like a good pour as well, lad. I'm also actually going back to something. I can't remember now what I haven't. I know I have a bunch of whiskey now, but I'm having the Glenfiddich 15-year-old, the Solera cask. I know I've had this on the podcast because I remember talking about the fact that they never completely empty the barrels. That's that thing. In this whiskey, so I know I've had it. I need to at some point listen back and just like keep notes on what I've had and haven't had, because there are some bottles that I haven't had on the podcast yet that I haven't finished. But it's earlier in the evening here. We're not recording as late as usual, so this whiskey is like a light Speyside, and it fits. And I had a pretty light cigar today as well, so my palate isn't too warmed up yet. So this is a good one. So cheers, lad.
Nice. Cheers. I also did want to just add a little note now that we're talking, or because I poured a Negroni, is that I haven't told you this even, but I'm gonna meet my friend from Canada in the Alps to ski, and then I'm having one night in Milan before I go back to Lund. So I'm gonna go to the bar Basso in Milan, which is like the Negroni bar. I mean, Campari is from Milano, so. I'm gonna go on a little Campari soul searching trip in Milan for one night. Good luck. Just sitting by the piazza there and drinking Negronis, I think,
and smoking cigars. I hope, if you're outdoors. Damn, that sounds amazing. I remember you were talking about maybe doing a trip to somewhere, so that's really cool. Yeah. It's good that it's happening. Damn, I'm jealous.
Yeah, that'll be nice.
All right, lad. Well, let's before you travel to Italy, let's travel to a couple of locations in this podcast.
Very nice.
As a master of the transition, I am. We often talk about different regions of the world that produce cigars, and there's a big sort of misconception, because people talk about where is the cigar from, and I think this stems from the fact that cigars used to be Cuban. And Cuban cigars have always been puros. So people have always been able to say, oh, this is a Cuban cigar, and back in the day, like I'm talking late 1800s here, it would be a Cuban cigar or it would be like an American cigar, where that would be like the lower quality stuff. But obviously, since the Cuban embargo, a lot of cigars aren't puros anymore. And we focus on where the cigar is made. Often on websites that sell cigars, you can click, Dominican cigars, Nicaraguan cigars, and sometimes Honduran cigars. And those are the locations that you get. But it's a misnomer, because the fact of the matter is very few cigars are puros. I mean, there's a couple Nicaraguan puros and some Dominican puros, but very few cigars are actually 100% from one place. So just because a cigar is assembled somewhere doesn't really mean it's from there. So we wanted to talk about two regions that produce wrapper tobacco today that make together like a big percentage of the world's wrapper tobacco. And you guys that are listening have, with 100% certainty, smoked a cigar with at least the wrapper from one of these countries, probably both. And just to end this monologue off, I just wanted to say, I mean, there are many ways you can heighten the experience of smoking a cigar. Obviously, we get that question a lot on Instagram and everywhere. The setting of where you smoke the cigar is, of course, important. The company that you're keeping when you're smoking the cigar, and the pairings, obviously, that changes and heightens the mood. But for me, as you guys know, with all the history videos and podcasts that we do, one thing that really adds to the experience personally is the knowledge and the true history, the story and work that goes behind the tobacco in the cigar that we're smoking. So without further ado, we're going to dive into Cameroon and Ecuador today and talk about the rich history, because there's a lot of history behind these two countries that produce some of the best class tobacco in the world. And Ruben, you're going to talk about Cameroon to start us off here with that incredible story behind the tobacco there.
Absolutely. So, as you said, the first location, Cameroon, or actually the border between Cameroon and the Central African Republic. Because the Cameroon, or as it's called also, the Central African tobacco, it is a very rare leaf, very rare in the sense that it is very difficult to acquire, and that for its like time since the 90s has only prided a few cigars as the featured wrapper on them. It has an amazing story, and today there is really only one name that is rightly associated with it, and that is, of course, Mirapfel. Because
you guys might recognize. I just wanted to interject quickly. You guys might recognize it. I don't know if you're going to say it, but obviously we were on the Meet the Professor show with Carlito Fuente, and one of the most stylish men on there was Jeremiah Mirapfel, who's the head of the family now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So Jeremiah, he's, I mean, just to have spoken with him personally and then to have gone into this story and read about everything that his father and, his father before that also did for the cigar community is really cool. And just how it's so close in time and everything. It's crazy. With that being said, like if it weren't for Rick, Josh and Jeremiah, Josh being Jeremiah's brother, then it really Cameroon tobacco wouldn't exist. And blends like the Don Carlos or the Hemingway lines of Arturo Fuente, they would have to find a different wrapper, and I'm not so sure Carlito or Jose Blanco would be very happy with that, because I mean they are big preachers of Cameroon tobacco or Cameroon wrapper tobacco.
Yeah, there you immediately get two examples of really popular cigars. I'm sure a lot of people listening here have smoked the Don Carlos and probably haven't realized, maybe a lot of the people, that Cameroon refers to the actual place where it's grown. So yeah, Lad, go ahead, go back to the story. How did Cameroon come to be, and what's the history behind it?
So the first initial sequence was in the beginning of the 1900s when the Dutch settlers brought a Sumatra seed to this region and planted that. So that's an example where we talk about a seed from a different place being grown somewhere else.
Right, and that's an Indonesian seed. Right?
Exactly.
That's what Sumatra references.
Indonesian Sumatra. Good clarification. But it was, so the beginning of the 1900s wasn't that significant, but it was just the origin. But it was up around the late 1950s. Where the first marks of the Cameroon wrapper tobacco on the premium cigar market was found. And although I mentioned Mirapfel, this wasn't his time or their time to enter the stage, really, because in the late 1950s, France was, they had colonized the Central African Republic.
Right.
So, it was their best interest and... to control the monopoly they had there through their French tobacco monopoly called CETA,
right.
Which, side note, merged with Spanish Tabacalera to form Altadis and so on. There's a story there as well. But, many African nations were colonies during this time still in the late 1950s. And the Central African Republic was just undergoing, and I say this in air quotes, independence there, because many countries in Africa were gaining independence, but I mean I guess you can say it was just a different type of colonialism, because, well, of course the European countries wanted to keep their grip on all the natural resources. They wanted to control the land that they had colonialized all these years.
I wonder, I really like one question that comes up that we're not going to be able to answer here, but I'm just curious about, it would be cool to find an answer at some point, but I wonder how Cameroon and the Central African Republic came to be. I wonder if the French just didn't really have a use for those colonies and they thought they could grow tobacco there, or if the soil was truly perfect. Because this is a question that I've had before, and I've tried to ask Jose Blanco in our interview with him, are there more countries that are is this happenstance? Because I mean, if you can grow tobacco in Cameroon and the Central African Republic, which is on the other side of the world of the Caribbean, there must be more places, right? So I'm just wondering, I would love to find out how those two countries came to be, if it is the true soil there or if it's more happenstance.
Yeah, that is true, because when reading this, they did send an actual tobacco expert there. So they did send brains there to kind of check the lands that they were good, but it might have also been happenstance that they that this was where they could find good tobacco and wanted to get in on the scene. so yeah, the initial tobacco was harvested and sold by what I mentioned, the French tobacco monopoly. Um, and yeah, they set up a business there. And what they did was they sold this tobacco with really unique and questionable methods. Um, because what they did was they didn't sell it traditionally like others would, where they would let developers come and check out the tobacco, feel it, and all that. All they would do was send samples to Paris, where they sold tobacco bales through silent bidding, where the bales weren't even present.
Right.
So the bales were like in a completely different place. So the people who bought it couldn't really feel what they were buying. They only got the sample.
Yeah, it goes against the whole premium cigar thing, where it's just very much money oriented, right? And it's not as artistic if you can't check out every bale. That's true.
No, exactly, yeah. And this was during a period that was, of course, very interesting to buy tobacco from an African country, because it hadn't really been done before. So they were really exploiting this kind of hype and this interest to this newly made popular tobacco, which obviously drove prices up a lot through silent bidding. And since they didn't show the tobacco they were actually selling, they kept the best tobacco for themselves to put into their own cigars that they were manufacturing. Right. So kind of these cheap tricks and methods, they seldom go unnoticed and seldom survive. So this one, of course, also came crashing down and kind of, bit itself in the back.
Yeah, it's classic colonial methods, right? I mean, it's just maximizing it's sort of squeezing the rag dry of every single drop, right? Like trying to take advantage of it in every single way. It's kind of as painful to hear the story like this.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they had no intention of actually doing it right. They have probably very little knowledge of premium cigars, right? Like they just want to, maximize the profit. So that's a big shame. That's a big shame. It's not surprising that it came crashing down.
No, definitely. Because, I mean, why wouldn't it come crashing down? You had this uncertainty of if you were even getting good tobacco, and you also had rising prices that didn't match the quality that they thought it was. So it naturally, came to the ground, just, leaving a few consistent bidders. And, eventually they faced also with less money into it, they faced smaller crops and worse quality. And just the operations kind of just ceased to exist over one night. And suddenly in 1993, they just put locks on the door and it was game over for them.
Another thing I thought was kind of interesting is the fact that when reading about this, a lot of the tobacco that came from Cameroon was used in like some machine-made stuff. And for Europe, like Henry Winterman's and stuff that's still around.
Exactly.
Today. So it's also extra. I mean, I think that's doubly interesting because first and foremost, these European machine-made cigar makers are probably just wanting to find tobacco that's usable. So the fact that they would stick around for so long and like go through this trouble is a little bit strange. I guess maybe it was still more convenient to buy tobacco from France, because if you're making German machine-made cigars, that's a closer purchase than flying it over from the States or something.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's kind of crazy that you're going through this enormous difficulty producing, as we'll probably hear more from how tough it is to produce there, but also just the selling thing to make these crappy machine-made cigars that obviously were selling big back in those days, but still kind of a crazy thing. And also not surprising then if they find a solid alternative that they would turn their back on the French, because it's just a lot of hassle for very little reward, right?
No, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, at this point we're in now 1993. They had been kind of phasing this out. They had lost, consistent customers. And I guess really no one knew what the future of Central African tobacco would look like at this point, because it was very uncertain. They just shut down operations overnight. No one knew what it would look like, except for maybe one man. And a name that has, risen to prominence today. Right. Any guesses who this could be?
I would guess it's the Merapfels, right? But
yes.
They did work with... So this is something, I mean, you read a little bit more now, but they did work with African tobacco before. I mean, obviously they couldn't grow it because the French had it, but they did have a foot in the door in some ways, right?
They did, exactly, because they had been purchasers of African tobacco for a long time. Okay. And was one of the only remaining customers left in the French part. So they had been purchasers of that, and they had also this long family business within tobacco, dating over, I think it's 146 years this year. Crazy. Or something like that, the family Crazy. Business. So, I mean, they'd definitely been in the scene of tobacco. So that being said, now it was time for Rick Merapfel to enter the spotlight of the stage. Because, like I said, even if he had played a role in the previous act, the next one was sure to be, marked by him, really. So yeah, he had been a purchaser, and now that the fate of the French had met its maker in Central Africa, he was in a position to take over operations. Because as he had been a regular, in the region, a lot of Central Africans came to him to kind of persuade him to take over these operations, because the absence of tobacco cultivation in this area would leave many people jobless. So of course they wanted to continue cultivating tobacco because it meant a lot of jobs. And he was obviously no stranger to the region, no stranger to tobacco. And it was really thanks to his efforts during this very uncertain period that we even have Cameroon tobacco today. Because if no one would have stepped in, this would have most likely just been a colonial effort that, where Cameroon tobacco's name also had been driven down to the bottom so that it couldn't be resurrected. Yeah. Because at this time, Cameroon tobacco wasn't, it wasn't performing that well. They had met these difficulties.
It's a gutsy call. I mean, it is like, if you just line up what we've just discussed, it's a gutsy move, because, I mean, it's clearly kind of tough to grow. It doesn't have a good reputation. Like you said, it's been sold in really poor ways before, and it hasn't really been used in extremely premium cigars, right? So it doesn't really, I guess people probably wouldn't have seen a big potential in it, right? So you really need a very special kind of person to actually make the move to do this. And I guess the Merapfel family and Rick was that kind of guy who was just, a visionary enough to step in. It's kind of inspiring, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the story gets even more inspiring because, like we teased earlier, the land around this area, this region, is so extremely difficult to access. So to be able to come into this region and decide, I'm gonna take this step to resurrect this tobacco, and you can't really undermine the amount of efforts that was put into this.
Yeah, we need to paint the picture of how, I mean, because I think a lot of people listening, and I think myself included, before really understanding this story, you think of a lot of these developing nations like Nicaragua. I mean, Nicaragua has been a very developing nation. They've had a lot of political turmoil, and you sort of equate a lot of these developing nations. But the fact of the matter is, the political and infrastructure situation in these parts of the Cameroon and the Central African Republic is nowhere close. Like, if you guys listened to our Arturo Fuente podcast, you heard that there were, the difficulties were bad in Nicaragua, right? There were overthrowing of the government, there were fires, but that's really the extent of it. Other than that, they had functioning roads, at least, in these countries, and they had, I mean, in general, sort of a functioning political system. Other than that, I mean, this is nowhere close. This is a whole nother world, even.
Exactly, because, I mean, because this isn't even close to, I mean, where we are right now. I encourage you to look at a map if you're not so certain of this area. It's I mean, it's so far away from the capital of Cameroon, Yaoundé, and because it's really along the border between Cameroon and the Central African Republic.
Yeah.
So to even get there, you have to, drive with a pickup truck, like a 4-wheel drive along these bumpy ass roads. Well, I mean, first you have to, if you want to go there, you have to make a 9-hour flight to the capital, and then from there it's a 12-hour ride, and it's not a freeway drive. It's, you know, just bumpiness, you know, going
12
on.
hours.
Because there's really no roads there at all. And, you know, on top of this, the region is also located perfectly, you know, in one of the most corrupt and dangerous regions of Africa, where, you know, police will not let you pass unless you bribe them, and then, you know, they just put up roadblocks. And
I read the story on the Cigar Aficionado magazine where the journalist is, you can tell, like, these journalists like Gregory Montola and, like, I mean, they've been around the world, so they're no strangers to wilderness in terms of, like I mentioned, I mean, Honduras and Nicaragua, but even he was scared for his life. Like he said, he almost had to change his underwear because, I mean, in this part of Africa, and this is just one ride. Like, he's just gone there this one time, and he managed to experience a police officer coming up with an AK-47 to the window and you know, basically threatening their lives. They had to pay $20-$30 bribes along the way, like you said. And I mean, it's striking how, and this is just on one car ride. I mean, it basically appears as if it's this way every single time. It's mind-blowing.
No, exactly. I mean, and yeah, that was just to get to like the main part of the tobacco cultivation, but even to move along the different plants. I mean, you're in the rainforest, like jungle pretty much. So just to get to the different parts where they had the farms, it could take several hours.
Yeah, at that point, the car seems like a luxury because they have to hike, right?
Yeah, they had to hike, and they had to hike through also dangerous conditions just with the wild animals that are there.
Right.
I mean, there's wild animals that can kill you. It's not really like Stockholm or Lund where you know you're not going to meet a leopard when you when you take a walk.
A moose at worst. Yeah, that was another crazy story by the journalist, how he said, you know, Rick, he had an African helper there, obviously a guy from the area that could help translate and stuff. And usually they have to hike 3-4 hours between each farm because the farms are just dispersed between these rainforest plots. And the journalist asked Rick, you know, what happened to, because Rick mentioned that he had another guy before, and the journalist asked Rick what happened to him, and basically he got attacked by a leopard last time he was hiking, and he had to fight the leopard with a machete to get free. I mean, that's literally what's happening to produce these tobacco leaves.
Yeah, so it's in this extremely raw, you know, environment and all that, and Rick, he wasn't. As described, he wasn't a man who really got into the politics of it all. He was there to grow good tobacco and just to really help out the locals there, and did so in an extremely nice fashion, because even though he said he didn't want to get involved in the politics, he really did benefit the region of East Cameroon and the Western CAR, you know, in the way he handled his business there.
Yeah.
Because he didn't like walk in there as this new colonialist who wanted to take the land. He actually created the private company, which was owned 60% by the Merifel family and 40% by the native people of, you know, the people that were working for the company. And this made the native people shareholders in the company that they're a part of, which was completely unknown of before and new to the region. I mean, can you imagine France had their grip on these countries for a long time, and, you know, on the economy prior, and just had used their different methods to kind of, you know, move the money around to themselves and to the rich politicians that they had appointed as their you know, peacekeeping people. But really what they were doing, they were just making those people extremely rich and then putting money in their own pockets. So this was a really fresh change of pace.
Yeah, that was a really touching part of the story when you hear, like, when some of the locals are being interviewed about, because earlier on you get the sense, and you're told that Rick is sort of seen as a god in the area. And when I read about this, I was like a little bit iffy when I heard that. I was like, like, is this because he's like this rich white man? But then you sort of start to understand why, and it's because what you just said, like, these people have since, I mean, white Europeans colonialized Africa have just seen various levels of a master and servant style relationship. I mean,
Exactly.
it was literally slavery back in the day, but even throughout the 1900s when they were a colony, like you said, I mean, sure, they might have had wages technically, but they don't have any. I mean, they're just working for the owners. I mean, it's basically like serfs in old European feudalism. Like these are just, they don't own anything really. And so the fact that he comes in and says, you know, let's start owning this property and this cultivation and this company together, that just the fact that he offered to do this is like that made them, like, that touched them to the core, you know, like they couldn't believe it. That's never happened. And that's something they say literally, it's never happened in the region before and since.
No, exactly. And it is just so amazing, and something I wanted to just pause and reflect on, like you just did, that how much one single person can do, like, for a country that has been so, or a region that has been so neglected and just used and exploited. I mean, it is actually crazy to think the power of a one person in that situation that can accomplish this.
Yeah, I mean, one man created, I read 5,000 jobs and 100,000 people are fed in the region because of Rick Merfeld. I mean, it's crazy.
And this was also at that time, you know, in the early beginnings, in the early 2000s. Now I'm not really sure what that number is, but it might be higher.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is, certainly worth reflecting over and just taking an extra second to think about that. But, you know, there were definitely all these obstacles of politicians wanting to get in on it because they were seeing that it was going well.
Right.
And he also did his part there in withstanding, you know, cutting them in on a piece of the cake, just saying, you're not getting a job through my company. I mean, you can apply if you want to. You'll have to go through the normal interviewing process, which is kind of funny to think of, you know, an earlier really corrupt politician who was just used to getting whatever they asked for, getting that no. But yeah, there were certainly a lot of obstacles to overcome. And so I guess you can ask yourself, really, why bother with all this? And obviously the quality now has reached the impeccable standard that we hear about today, you know, with the rich, oily, dark leaves, after the French had tarnished the reputation. But also an important factor for him was helping the African people in that region and being able to, you know, get this great tobacco that, because he really lived for tobacco. I mean, this was his life and all that he knew. So just the joy for him to be able to extract this amazing tobacco from this incredibly difficult region.
Amazing.
Meanwhile, helping the people of that region. And that was the driving factor for him. And other than that, the region itself is, I mean, it's located on the equator. It's kind of, there's kind of a natural tapado, or as you say, like cheesecloth, looming over it. Which we will see similarities to in Ecuador, I assume we're going to.
The tobacco itself is incredible. Like, if you I hope you guys have smoked some Cameroon wrapper cigars. If you haven't, I mean, I just urge you to smoke a Don Carlos. I think that's the best. That's the best Cameroon wrap cigar I've had. It's the best sort of. It's the best presentation and experience of a Cameroon wrapper you can have. But it's extremely unique because the Cameroon tobacco has an almost gray silver hue. It's absolutely astonishing how different it is from any other tobacco, and it's the most toothy tobacco you can ever see. I mean, it looks like it has goosebumps. Literally, it's so prickly with like tooth and oils, but it's very delicate. And I know they wanted to play it down and say it's less delicate now than before. I'm sure before it was like paper thin. But it's very, very delicate. Like you can tell it's just like rice paper thin, the tobacco. But it is just bursting with flavor. My God, it's good.
Yeah. No, exactly everything you said. Like also the sweetness to it, and what I also when I was like, they don't use it to make very big ring gauge cigars because the leaves are in general not that big.
Yeah.
and like you said, delicate, so extremely difficult to roll. Which is why I guess you see them on very, very like well-crafted cigars as well.
Right. Yeah, there are a bunch of cigars though. I mean, you guys can.
Yeah, there are absolutely.
Maybe you wrote down a list, but I don't know if you had a list.
I don't have a list, but
Oliva Serie G is Cameroon. Rocky Patel Vintage 2003 is Cameroon. Those are common.
Cameroon, yeah, exactly.
And like you said, the Fuente Don Carlos and Hemingway series are Cameroon. There's a lot. They're easy to get hands on. But there's a lot that aren't actual Cameroon. We should mention this.
Exactly. And because as we mentioned earlier, when talking to Jeremiah, there's often, I mean, he's this personality, and one thing that he often comes back to saying is, if it's not Marapfel, it's not Cameroon.
True.
Which they recently kind of like trademarked and put on a holographic sticker as a kind of seal of authenticity, which they put on a few Arturo Fuente boxes that include the Cameroon wrapper. Because, I mean, fakes, or no, I should say fakes.
Impersonators,
sorry, is the right word. That use Cameroon as, a selling point, that actually grow the seeds somewhere else is, of course, very frustrating for, the Marapfel family, who are putting in all this work and going through this difficult process to get this beautiful tobacco that they're proud of. Then I also agree that you shouldn't really be able to call a cigar Cameroon if it's not grown in Cameroon. I mean, if it just uses the Cameroon seed.
Yeah.
Because you have a bunch of different seeds that can be grown in different places.
Yeah.
But does an Habano seed make a cigar Cuban? Of course not.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a weird thing because I guess it's because Cuba applies pressure to this, but it's very strict. Like you would never see. I mean, some of these cigars are called whatever brand name and then Cameroon, which just makes
Aladino Cameroon.
Yeah, it makes it impossible to tell the difference. You would never see a cigar in the U.S. called something and then Cuba. Like it would have to say it always says specifically Cuban seed, or it says Habano seed or Habano wrapper, but even then it's like a little bit distinguished. I think it's a little strange how freely they're able to use the Cameroon name without distinguishing that it's not Cameroon wrapper, it's Cameroon seed. And even then that doesn't make much sense because Cameroon seed is a Sumatra seed, so I don't even know how logical they are.
No,
there.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, over time, a lot of like the Cameroon seed has become its own thing now that it has been in the region so long, and they all evolve and stuff, I guess. But yeah, like Aladino Cameroon, they use a Cameroon seed, but grown in Honduras.
Yeah.
But then the cigar is just called Cameroon, not even Honduran Cameroon, just Cameroon.
Yeah.
Because I mean, they've done such a good job in making the wrapper so attractable.
Right. That's what I was gonna say. You nailed it, Lot. That would never have been the case like 50 years ago. Nowadays, they've managed to give Cameroon such a big reputation that people are actually wanting to impersonate it and use its name to pretend that their own cigar is a Cameroon cigar. That's a testament to the Marapfel family. But I think I wouldn't in general care this much about a seed. I mean, I don't think anyone has the right to claim a strain or type of tobacco, but in this case, it's so extremely connected deeply with one family having such a hard struggle. I mean, it's not like they are, like we discussed, the French monopoly where they've just claimed something by themselves and are doing it half-assedly. I mean, the Marapfel family is truly, truly fighting to make this possible, and the fact that they've done so and others are trying to sort of piggyback off that success and fame, it's a little bit sad. So that's sort of why I get a little more defensive over this compared to something else.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I mean, especially since they've been the only ones doing the investing and everything in that area, so
it's so closely connected to their family. It's almost like you feel like they should have the right to trademark it.
Exactly. But just some like final notes on that with the investment that they've done in the area is that a lot of what is still like how the tobacco is cultivated there is done very, I guess you can say old fashioned, because they haven't.
It's very rudimentary.
They have so
yeah.
exactly, because they have no possibilities, to for irrigation systems or to bring tractors or anything. This is, I mean, hilly. This is rainforest. This is, you can't get any equipment there really. So they're very heavily dependent on weather, climate, and all that. And I mean, usually it's pretty stable with the amount of sun they get and all that. They can calculate for that. But a problem that has been difficult for them is the effect that global warming is having on the planet. And I mean, specifically in this case for Central Africa, because the differing weather with sometimes some seasons a lack of rain, it creates this uncertainty to how much tobacco they can even produce. So some years they've had excellent harvests, but some years they've had real issues with this. And I guess that's mostly due to they can't control the amount of water they're getting.
It's crazy.
And I
remember reading a story also on the fact that, like you say, they have very rudimentary tools and stuff. I mean, they were trying to construct a new warehouse, and it took literal weeks. I mean, maybe in the end months, because when this was written, it wasn't done yet. But to get a bulldozer there, they had to obviously drive it through these brick or these dirt roads, and it would go 1 mile an hour, this bulldozer, and it would break down several times, obviously. And for it to be fixed, they had to ship parts from Europe to where it was to fix. I mean, it took them literal weeks to get the bulldozer over. I mean, it's insane how basic the tools that they have to work with and how long everything takes. But it's a struggle.
Yeah, I hope everyone's really gained a picture in their head of like what this process has been like for them, and really what the amount of work they've put into this for us to be able to have Cameroon wrapper on our cigars. So next time you smoke a cigar with the Cameroon wrapper on it, think about how the process has been for it to come into your hands.
Yeah, you should really reflect. And we say this a lot, like respecting the history and work behind it. And it can sound like buzzwords, but like that's why I wanted to do this podcast now and give you a background on Cameroon, especially. This Ecuador portion will be a little shorter and a little less detailed, but the Cameroon section especially is. Look, it's not just let's respect the art form of it, like abstract sort of thing. I mean, this is literal work and struggle and changing actual human beings' lives and a course of history. Like the fact that this much work has gone behind just making the wrappers that we're burning up with our mouths is insane.
Exactly.
So like Ruben said, that's a perfect way to end it off. When you're smoking an Arturo Fuente Don Carlos next time, or I mean, if it's Rocky Patel, whatever Cameroon, just think about the insane journey that tobacco's been on to reach your humidor. It's worth reflecting on, and it heightens the experience, I'll tell you that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right, lad, we're traveling somewhere else now, though, right?
More traditional. I wanted to end it with Ecuador because it's a little more interesting just to reflect on because this is a much more modern story. Even though Cameroon with Meripfel started in 1993, this is a little more of a reflection on our modern society. So obviously, this is a little more connection to how I started off this segment, talking about how people talk about cigars being Dominican or Nicaraguan, but in so many occasions, your cigar has an Ecuadorian wrapper, and I don't think people here listening or in any cigar lounge or anywhere in the world realize how much Ecuadorian tobacco is being consumed in the world, because it is one of the most grown cigar wrappers in the world, bar none. You guys think of Davidoff and their white label series being Dominican, and sure, it's rolled in the Dominican Republic and a lot of the filler is Dominican, but every single white label Davidoff has an Ecuadorian wrapper. That's a big portion of the world's cigars. So that's a lot. So I wanted to really shine some light on Ecuador because it is an unsung hero in the world of cigars. So to get a little basic understanding about what Ecuador is, it's a little bit further away than people realize from the rest of the Caribbean. So it is a bit different in that sense. I mean, Ecuador is one of the few South American continental countries that produces cigar tobacco. Obviously, you have Brazil to a lesser extent, Colombia to a much lesser extent, and Peru to a very, very small extent. But Ecuador is the only really continental cigar producer that dominates cigar cultivation. Otherwise, you have the Caribbean islands, obviously, and then the Central American countries. But Ecuador sort of stands by itself, and this is another Ecuadorian country that's on the equator. Obviously, that's why it's called that. It's very much on the equator. It's actually on the west coast of South America, so also a little bit away from the rest of the countries in that sense. You have a beautiful, diverse country. It's not that popular for tourism, but they have some nice beachy areas. But that's really not where we're heading when we're producing tobacco, and that's kind of a trend in general. You know, the tobacco cultivation is not done where tourists go in many ways. It's inlands, it's in valleys where there's a lot of fertile soils and not beaches, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so in the center, and Ruben has been to similar sort of landscapes, I'd say, because where Ecuadorian tobacco is produced is in the center of the country, and it's extremely volcanic. Volcanic's the word, yeah. It's extremely volcanic. There's 32 active volcanoes in Ecuador, actually, and this is the whole reason.
Yeah, damn, that is crazy.
Yeah, right? 32 active ones, and probably more dormant ones, but that's the whole reason as to why Ecuador actually exists as a cigar-producing nation, because they have enormously volcanic, mineral-rich soil. So it's dark, it's like cocoa powder, it's heavy, and it's made and fertilized by literal volcanic ash. Oftentimes the volcanoes do erupt, and volcanic ash is obviously spread around all of Ecuador, and that ash kind of simmers down into the soil and further fertilizes it. So they don't need to use that much fertilizer there. That was another thing that was active in Cameroon, I remember reading as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was actually kind of surprising for me to realize that volcano ashes are extremely fertile. But then when you think about it, they have all these minerals, you know, in them. So, because, you know, when you think of volcano, think of fire and just pretty much
destruction,
dead things.
Yeah.
So.
True.
So for it to be extremely fertile, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, both of these, because I remember reading that about Cameroon, that they barely need to use fertilizer because the soil is so rich in nutrients, and it's sort of similar in Ecuador. So obviously it's perfect for growing cigars, and that's one of the reasons it's so active nowadays. Another extremely unique aspect of Ecuador, which is very different from the volcanic aspect, is the fact that the inland country is apparently covered in clouds all year round. And this is one of the first things I remember reading about Ecuador, which was why it's so unique. Ruben mentioned this a little bit, hinted at it before, but the tapados, or the cheesecloths, as you guys might know, everyone that smoked a Connecticut Shade cigar, it's a very light and also thin, mild tobacco, and that comes from the fact that it's covered from shade. If you just want a basic rundown, very flavorful, heavy tobacco, like Nicaraguan tobacco, is often sun-grown, more nutrients, rich, thick, heavy flavors. If you filter the sun away, you get a light, mild tobacco, and that's a Connecticut Shade. And in Ecuador, it's so unique because of the enormous cloud covering. You only get 500 hours of sunlight a year in some of these aspects, and this is a country in the equator, so it's not like in Sweden where it's just pitch black half of the year. I mean, the sun just doesn't penetrate the clouds because it's such a heavy layer of clouding, and it's kind of outstanding and incredible. I mean, I had no idea that places like this existed. That, I mean, you hear that Seattle and London are very rainy, but this is just a cloudy place all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, 500 sun hours in a year, that is not a lot.
It's nothing.
for a country on the equator like that. And yeah, just to mention that it is not standard at all for, you know, wrapper tobacco to be sun-grown, because it's supposed to be, you know, delicate and all that.
Right.
But both in Cameroon and in Ecuador, you have this natural cheesecloth, which makes it that you don't need to cover them with an actual one. So kind of cool that you can sun grow them and that they still become, that delicate.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that's another thing that I read about both these countries that were similar. Both proprietors of tobacco in both these countries talked about the positive aspects of how natural the tobacco is, because you don't need to fertilize the soil as much. You don't need to cover the tobacco with cheesecloths. This is really just very natural tobacco, and they believe that this adds to a lot of the reasoning why this is so good. So they can effectively grow Connecticut shade tobacco in Ecuador without any cheesecloths, just out in the open, and that makes it a lot easier, less work. I mean, obviously that has a lot of benefits, so you can see why Ecuador is a little bit more of a good place to start growing cigars. Another thing is they have very different times of the year. You have a wet period and a dry period, much like the rest of the tobacco growing nations, but in some of these countries, like the Dominican Republic, you have a dry season and a rainy season, and it's the wet season that's better to grow tobacco apparently, and then the dry season's a little too dry, I guess. But in Ecuador, when it rains in these valleys, the fields become literal lakes. So it's underwater up to your head, so you have to vacate entirely, which is kind of a unique aspect as well. And that's another way it becomes so naturally rich, because the rains wash down even more nutrients, and then when the water finally evaporates, what's left is sediment and even more rich nutrients. So the earth in Ecuador is really the driving unique sort of aspect there, and it's so cool to see.
Yeah, I found that really fascinating to read as well. Just that the combination of the volcanic ash, the farms being flooded underwater, and this not being a bad thing, this actually being something that leaves nutrients behind. It's just like it's made completely to grow tobacco. And that's cool.
Yeah, it's very, very unique, the earth. I mean, like it's so weather beaten, but still it can produce this beautiful plant. So in Ecuador, it's also a little bit different in the sense that we have it's more similar to Cameroon than the Caribbean. In the Dominican Republic, you have countless cultivators. I mean, literally, you have thousands of tobacco producers, same in Nicaragua, whatever. In Ecuador, there's really two families that produce tobacco. This is the Perez family, and their brand is called ASP Enterprises. And this is something that I found so fascinating, because this is they call themselves the biggest tobacco producing cigar producer in the world, which is surprising, because who's heard of ASP Enterprises? No one, right?
Yeah.
But they grow all of the Connecticut tobacco in Ecuador, and by relation to that, they grow almost all of the Connecticut tobacco in the world, because the only other Connecticut tobacco that's actually grown is a lesser amount in the United States, in the Connecticut Valley. It's still being cultivated there, but because of various factors that I get into later, it's much more difficult. And then there's a little tiny amount in Honduras, but it's negligible. So ASP Enterprises and the Perez family produces pretty much all the Connecticut shade tobacco in the world. So, I mean, I guess I could say a list, but there's a countless, any Connecticut cigar you can think of, it's with, I mean, all the Davidoffs, like I said, all the Camachos. I mean, Fuente uses their tobacco. Padron's Damaso is, even there, Connecticut has an Ecuadorian. Almost all of the cigars, with every single mild cigar, if you Google a list of best beginner cigars, it's almost all Perez family ASP Enterprise tobacco.
Ah, damn.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, from big to small, the cigar I had today that I was hinting at, it was a Matilde, which is by a small brand by Jose Sejias. That was a Connecticut shade cigar with Ecuadorian tobacco from a really small company. I mean, they're all buying the tobacco from the Perez family.
Damn.
The Perez family obviously has Cuban roots. We're not going to get into the family history too much. Maybe that's for another time. But they've been growing tobacco in Cuba in the 1800s, passed down generation to generation. Now it's David Perez, who is the head of the company and who grows all the tobacco there in Ecuador. And then you have a more familiar name, and it's the Oliva family. So John Oliva Sr. is head of that family, and they grow all the other Ecuadorian tobacco. So those of you guys that are a little more nerdy might have realized that we're talking a lot about Connecticut shade, but you might have thought, but I've smoked a lot of cigars with Sumatra wrappers or Habano wrappers. And that's the Oliva family. So they grow all the other tobacco pretty much. So if you think of cigars like the Ashton VSG, for example, that's a Sumatra wrapped cigar by the Oliva family. Their own Oliva Serie V Milanio has an Ecuadorian Sumatra wrapper as well. Those are two of the most praised cigars of all time, the Ashton VSG and the ESG as well. So two Ashton cigars for the Fuente family. But yeah, the Fuente family are very intertwined here. I just realized they're the big consumers of Cameroon, but also very heavily in Ecuador. It's pretty cool. These two families produce different tobacco, but that also means that they're producing tobacco in different areas. So as we mentioned, there's a natural clouding in Ecuador, but obviously if the entire country was clouded, you wouldn't be able to grow Sumatra tobacco, and you wouldn't be able to grow Corojo tobacco that they also do. So in the southern part, in an area called Guayas, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, maybe Ruben has, Guayaquil is a pretty big Ecuadorian city in southern Ecuador. That province is where the Oliva family primarily grows their tobacco. It's less cloud coverage. It's still pretty cloud coverage. So you can grow the Ashton Virgin Sun Grown, which is what VSG stands for, in the sun with that Sumatra wrapper. But it doesn't become too heavy. It's still wrapper because there's more clouding. But then north in the Los Rios province, that's where ASP and David Perez grow their Connecticut wrappers. Oliva have been growing there since 1980, and ASP have been growing in Ecuador since 1971. So a little later in the game, we divulged a little bit of the story of the rush to the other countries in our Fuente podcast. As you remember, lad, I mean, a lot of these these companies, they went to other countries completely. They went to Jamaica and Panama and stuff back like right after the embargo. Yeah. Ecuador, I guess, was noticed a little bit later. But they've still been growing there pretty long. I mean, compared to the Maripil family, it's a lot longer. One fun fact is, though, that Ecuador used to grow Connecticut shade, obviously, but a lot of the Candela stuff, that's why these countries moved. And you might remember, we've talked about this, lad, like the American market shade, as it's called, that's Candela. I mean, the standard in the 1970s was Candela wrapper. That's what was smoked.
Yeah. So crazy to think about today, like that was actually the most prominent shade.
And that's what ASP started making as a real cash crop. I mean, they sold countless amounts of bales of Candela wrapper and Oliva as well. So that's really where they started. And I guess as a byproduct of that, which is a fortunate event, they started finding out other strains of tobacco that could be grown. So we talked about how this is all wrapper tobacco, really, right? And I'm thinking what to name this episode. It might have to be like Talking Rappers or something. Rapping.
Rapping.
Because the cloud cover and because of the mineral-rich soil and all this stuff, and a byproduct is that only wrapper tobacco can be grown there. So this is one of the few countries, apart from Cameroon, because Cameroon is different as well, but there is no filler being made in Ecuador whatsoever. And it's kind of crazy because they supply so much of the world's tobacco production, but they make no filler whatsoever. I mean, compared to Cuba, Nicaragua, and Dominican, those three countries make everything. I mean, that's what almost all other stuff is made from. So that's very, very, very different. So to give you guys a little more of an insight on the people behind, because I mentioned quickly that there were two families, and I mentioned the names of them. So first we have Oliva, and obviously you guys have smoked Oliva cigars, and most likely it's a very famous brand. The head of that company is actually John Oliva Sr., and a fun fact about him is he used to play both defense and offense for the University of Florida, the football team. So
oh really?
Yeah, I don't know what positions he played, but if you Google a picture,
I mean, he's built like it.
Yeah, right. You've seen it.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty
definitely
pretty unique thing. But his father was a legend in the business before, Angel Oliva, and obviously they've been a long line of cigar producers before him. But he wanted to be a football player, an American football player. So that's pretty cool. I mean, it's a very different background. Some of these, I mean, we talked to Pete Johnson, and he has a very different background as well, being a musician. Some of these guys
within music, some
of these guys just have a different background completely.
exactly. With all this passion for cigars still.
So a former prospective football player takes over the Oliva family, obviously. So a very, very different background there. But now it's his son, John Oliva Jr., is working on it now. So that's another beautiful fact. I mean, we've talked about Fuente, we've talked about the Merapfels. This is all just family businesses, and maybe that's a reason why it's going so well for them. A fun quote by him, though, on Ecuador is the fact that he said, a good rule of thumb is when the country is fun to go to, the climate's perfect, and the political situation is great, the tobacco isn't worth a shit there. So it's a pretty telling story of the resilience of these people.
As we can tell from both Ecuador and Cameroon rapper, that seems to be very
exactly
true.
Right. It's a string. I mean, you really need to fight for it. I guess it's blood, sweat, and tears. That's what makes tobacco good, as cliche as it sounds.
Yeah.
Then the next guy you have is David Perez, obviously. Of ASP Enterprises, and this is worth. I mean, I hope you guys remember ASP, because this is it's insane how not almost every single cigar smoker has smoked several ASP's tobacco cigars, but he also, I mean, his father Alfredo, who was a Cuban cultivator before, he didn't want David Perez to become a farmer. So another situation here where they don't want them to go into the tobacco business. He wanted him to become a lawyer. But tobacco runs through these guys' blood. I mean, he made a deal with his dad. He was like, no way, I want to do this. So I'll put the money for school aside when I start the business. And if the business goes bad, then I'll take that money, put it into school, and I'll go try to be a lawyer. But they started ASP Enterprises. They actually grow tobacco in Mexico and Nicaragua too, I should say, but mainly in Ecuador. And he did it with his dad. His dad actually died in 2000. And he was only 54, Alfredo. So it's very similar to Cameroon, actually, in Merapfels, where it's a father and son relationship.
Yeah, because I didn't mention that, because Rick also passed at like around 54, right? In 2004.
Correct. So very similar.
Yeah, as well. So similar fates there as well.
And now, very similar. He was 31 when his father passed. So they're very, very, very similar. So they grow all the Connecticut tobacco there, but I do want to mention quickly their farm called Casjuca, which is an acronym for a long Spanish name that I won't say now, but they have like a laboratory there where it's like a crazy lab where they mix hybrids on all types of ways, and they like pollinate different tobacco plants with the use of women that like take bees and stuff, and they're like crossbreeding. It's insane. It's like a cigar nerd's dream in there, because they've grown some tobacco plants that are apparently the leaves are so thick and heavy that they can't even they're like scraping the floor, like they can't grow up at all. Like it's just all these crazy plants apparently, and it looks like it looks a little like apparently a little scary because some of the plants are weird, but it's just this crazy laboratory that ASP do there. Some of it hasn't worked, but some of it has made some cigars apparently. A thing to note, though, I mean, I think a big reason as to why ASP is so successful, but also under the radar, is that they don't officially disclose much of their information. Like, they don't say who their clients are officially. We do know, though, by various resources that pretty much all the tobacco that's Connecticut Shade is their clients, but they don't officially disclose this stuff. They're just very secretive about a lot of stuff. But yeah, just a cool company, it seems. I would love to go to Ecuador and see what they got going on there.
Yeah.
And then a little.
You wouldn't go to Ecuador for the beaches, at least. So
exactly. That was a funny thing.
Something.
That's a funny thing they said in the Cigar Aficionado ad, whereas most tourists go to Ecuador and bring sunblock and get ready to go to the beach, but when people go for cigar related things, no sunblock needed because of the clouds, and they're going straight to the countryside. So that's pretty cool there. Oliva, I did want to say, because we've talked a lot about Connecticut Shade, but the reason Oliva is so popular in Ecuador and why they've done so well recently is their Habano seed. And a list of, I'll tell you some cigars. The Romeo by Romeo Julieta, we don't smoke that here, obviously. But that's a very popular cigar in the States. The Rocky Patel 15th anniversary uses an Ecuadorian Habano by Oliva. Arturo Fuente's Rosado Sun-Grown Magnum R uses that, so another Fuente. I have that cigar in my humidor that I'm excited to smoke after reading this. And Herrera Esteli, I think you've smoked that cigar, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I remember I was like looking up this like what cigars had the Ecuador Habano because I was reading about Oliva, and then I saw the Jerez de Habano, terrific smoke.
Yeah, that
well.
uses a lower priming apparently, which didn't surprise me. I was glad they specified that because that's a kind of lighter cigar. They talk about how rich and dark the Habano wrapper is, but
yeah, exactly.
That's interesting. That's a lot of cigars. Maybe you guys have smoked some of those. And the Ecuadorian Habano was actually first planted in 2001 by Oliva, so that's very, very recent.
Mm-hmm.
And a little story of that. I mean, they tried to plant Ecuadorian Habano before, and a lot of other companies, but it was deemed to be crap basically. But the problem was that people didn't ferment it and age it long enough. So Oliva coming in with very much that Fuente mindset of not rushing the hands of time and allowing the tobacco to really develop, they were the first to really give it a chance to really let it sit and develop into this rich. And if it weren't for them, we wouldn't have the Ecuadorian Habano wrapper, which is a very important tobacco.
Yeah.
Another cool thing, and I'll just add some fun facts now at the end before we wrap this up about the production in Ecuador. Ecuador is a very agricultural country. A lot of the world's bananas come from there, a lot of other fruits and stuff of that nature. But they have local palm oil, apparently. And Oliva add this palm oil to their fertilizer, the little fertilizer they use. Yeah, you might have read that lot. Yeah. And I thought that was very cool. And that makes it I don't know if it's proven. They were hinting at the fact that a lot of the stuff that they do might be a little superstitious. But apparently it's supposed to make the tobacco a little more oily, which was pretty cool thing. I don't know. I've never heard adding oil before to the leaf. Some other final cool facts. Ecuador is pretty unique. The government actually mandates that all agricultural work, you need to have at least 4% of your workforce to be made up of people with infirmities or mental illnesses. Right. So Oliva obviously abides by this, and they do it happily. So they have a bunch of people that have autism and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And it's just another cool thing. I mean, they're just helping out a lot of people, obviously. Then they're working and obviously doing a great job. Another quote by John Oliva, because this guy is just full of them. And another fun fact, and I was speculating as to what this might be, but there are people that buy his Habano wrapper but won't admit that they're using a wrapper from Ecuador. So they'll buy Habano wrapper, they'll say it's Nicaraguan Habano, because he basically ponders that it might be because Nicaragua sounds better, people are more used to it, but he doesn't bother him much anymore. He just doesn't care, and he doesn't claim it to be anything that it's not. So pretty crazy. I wonder who that might be.
Yeah, that feels strange. I mean, especially now when like Ecuador wrapper is used so widely as well.
Right. Yeah.
But it just has that stigma. Maybe I know for certain people might not have like bought into into it yet.
Yeah, I will say that this is an older article, so it might have been back then, but still, it's a pretty interesting thing. It shows a little bit of the shady stuff.
Still like
that goes
2014, I think. Right.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of shady stuff in the cigar industry. Last thing that I found while really digging into this, I found an Ecuadorian newspaper actually in Spanish from the San Juan region, where ASP are active, and it showed a picture. It was from 2019, I think, of just a herd of people. It looked like people like lining up to go into like a football match or something, and it was apparently a picture of right before the growing season where people were lining up to hopefully try to get a job working for ASP. And I was a little bit surprised. I was like, wow, can't anyone just get a farmer job? But the article wrote about and praising, and there were a bunch of comments on the article from people that had worked there. Apparently, the tobacco jobs working in those fields are some of the best farming jobs there are available. And people like do anything to try to get their hands on it.
Oh, wow.
Because the companies, and this is why I wanted to end this off with, because we see that with the Fuente family, with their foundation, Cameroon, obviously, again with ASP and Oliva, how they're helping out the community. People's life standards are apparently changed the moment they get a job working these fields, and they're just investing so much in the communities because they believe that's the right way to do it. And it obviously works for everyone. So that was awesome. A really cool thing to see. And I just wanted to end it with a thought, because I keep going back to this. Every time I read about these families and these producers, I feel like the cigar producers are always the good guys, right? Like there's never any scandalous.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a completely impartial newspaper. This had nothing to do with tobacco producing. So and they're praising how well they work with the community. I'm just like always left wondering why people want to kill cigar producing so much. I mean, they're obviously doing so much for the communities.
Exactly. And yeah, for the communities, and it's also done strictly out of passion for cigars and tobacco. I mean, you wouldn't find anyone today cultivating tobacco that, you know, or so involved with tobacco that just does it for the money, because that doesn't exist. I mean, it's such a, I mean, as we heard from so many stories, there's a lot of pain going into it as well. I mean, with all the setbacks and everything. But they really do it for themselves, the community, and for like the local communities, and of course the cigar community. And I know you said you wanted to end with that, but I had to bring up this quote from Rick Merifel from this Cigar Aficionado, because this was a really nice quote by him, just in a conversation he had with the interviewer. He said, "I wonder if some banker in New York, smoking a cigar with Central African wrapper and with a glass of fine scotch, has any idea what it takes to get tobacco out of here. He probably doesn't care, but I wouldn't want to be in his shoes. I love it here doing this, and in the end, we both love cigars, and we love what we do."
It's beautiful.
So that kind of sums it up as well, like how it's the selflessness in what they do.
And the passion. It's incredible. Yeah. Thank you for that, lad. And I guess at the end of the day, I just hope you guys learned something, because we certainly learned a lot researching this. And really, I hope this does heighten your experience in the future. I hope the next time you light up a Fuente Don Carlos, like I said, any Cameroon wrap cigar, or any Ecuadorian Connecticut, or any Oliva Serie V Milanio that so many people love and smoke, think of the stories behind that we shared now, and think about the incredible work, because it is truly touching and so cool to learn about.
Yeah. So as always, thanks for listening into this. We had so much fun. Hope you guys did as well.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Cheers.